My name is Aurelia Vance, and I am 34 years old. For most of my life, I have existed in the quiet, dusty corners of my family's grand stage, a supporting character in a play that was always and exclusively about my older brother, Julian. He was the brilliant, charismatic sun. I was the distant, barely visible moon reflecting a fraction of his light. I had long ago made peace with my role as the responsible, low-maintenance daughter, the nobody who was good with numbers. I had built a life for myself in that quiet space, a life they never bothered to look at too closely. That is, until tonight. At our annual family dinner, a ritual of passive-aggressive judgment, my brother would finally say the quiet part out loud, branding me a nobody to my face. He had no idea that his casual cruelty would be the overture to the most spectacular and public revelation of my life. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about the moment the world learned my secret, hit like and subscribe to hear more true stories about the vindication that comes when you are profoundly underestimated. My life, on the surface, was a portrait of deliberate simplicity. I worked as a freelance data consultant, a vague but respectable title I'd invented that was just boring enough to shut down any follow-up questions. It allowed me to work from my small but meticulously organized apartment in a quiet, unassuming suburb. The apartment was my sanctuary, filled not with expensive furniture, but with books on cryptography, advanced mathematics, and theoretical physics. My social life was small and carefully chosen, consisting of a few trusted friends who understood my need for privacy. I drove a 7-year-old sedan, paid my bills the day they arrived, and found contentment in the elegant certainty of a perfectly executed algorithm. To my family, this quiet, frugal existence was proof of my lack of ambition, a confirmation that I was, as Julian so often implied, going nowhere. My family, the Vances, lived a very different life. My father, Richard, was a high-profile corporate attorney, a man who measured worth in stock portfolios and country club memberships. My mother, Eleanor, was a pillar of the local social scene, her life a whirlwind of charity galas and fundraising committees. They resided in the sprawling colonial house where I grew up, a place that always felt more like a showroom than a home. And then there was Julian. At 37, he was the golden son, a successful investment banker who had inherited my father's ambition and my mother's social grace. He was married to a woman named Camilla who was as polished and perfect as he was. They had 2 perfect children, attended the right parties, and lived in a modern mansion that had been featured in an architecture magazine. Julian's success was loud, visible, and easily understood by my parents. My work, on the other hand, was a quiet, complex mystery they had no interest in solving. I was the family's resident ghost, present but unseen, my accomplishments too abstract to be celebrated alongside Julian's tangible wealth. Tonight was the annual Vance Family Foundation dinner, a grand affair my mother hosted to raise money for the city orchestra. For everyone else, it was a night of glamour. For me, it was my yearly performance review, and I knew I was about to fail. To understand the dynamics of that night, you have to understand the foundation of our family, a structure built on the bedrock of Julian's perceived brilliance and my perceived adequacy. The pattern was set before I could even spell the word favoritism. I remember my 8th birthday. I had asked for a telescope. I was obsessed with the stars, spending hours in the local library devouring books on astronomy. My birthday arrived, and with it, a sensible educational globe. "A telescope is so specific, dear," my mother had said, kissing my forehead. "The world is full of possibilities. You shouldn't limit yourself." 2 months later, for Julian's 11th birthday, he mentioned a fleeting interest in filmmaking. My father arrived home the next day with a top-of-the-line video camera and editing software that cost more than a month's mortgage payment. "We have to nurture his creative genius," my father had announced to anyone who would listen. Julian's interest in filmmaking lasted 3 weeks. The camera gathered dust in his closet, but the message was clear. Julian's whims were genius to be nurtured. My passions were phases to be managed. The disparity sharpened in college. Julian attended a prestigious private university, his tuition and lavish lifestyle fully funded by my parents. He majored in business, joined the right fraternity, and graduated with honors in a new sports car, a graduation gift for projecting the image of success. I, on the other hand, had earned a full academic scholarship to the state university where I majored in pure mathematics and computer science. My parents had expressed their pride in a way that felt more like relief. "Oh, that's wonderful, Aurelia," my mother had exclaimed when I told them about the scholarship. "Just think of all the money we'll save." They never seemed to consider that my achievement was not about saving them money, but about earning my own way. While Julian was networking at cocktail parties, I was working part-time in the university's IT department, the quiet girl who could debug a line of code faster than any of the graduate students. It was there, in the hum of the university's servers, that my life took a turn no one in my family could have predicted. During my final semester, I was approached by a man named Ilias Thorne. He wasn't a corporate recruiter. He was a quiet, intense man in a nondescript suit who said he represented a private consortium that works in close partnership with national security agencies. He had been monitoring my final thesis, a complex paper on multi-layered encryption protocols. "Your work is not just theoretical, Ms. Vance," he had told me over coffee in a sterile campus cafe. "It has practical, real-world applications of the highest importance. We'd like to offer you a position." The job was with a shadowy organization called the Aegis Initiative. The work was classified, the salary was modest, but the mission was monumental, protecting the mission's critical digital infrastructure from cyber threats. I couldn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my parents, not even the government census. I would have to sign a non-disclosure agreement so binding, it felt like I was joining a secret order of monks. I would have a cover story, a vague job title, and a life of profound patriotic secrecy. For the girl who had spent her life feeling invisible, the offer to become officially invisible felt like destiny. I accepted without hesitation. My family believed I was a freelance analyst. In reality, I was one of the lead crypto analysts for the country's most elite cyber defense unit. The Vance Family Foundation dinner was in full swing. The ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel glittered with chandeliers and the clinking of champagne glasses. I had found a quiet corner near the French doors leading to the terrace, a familiar strategy for surviving these events. I wore a simple, elegant navy dress I had owned for years, a stark contrast to my mother's sequined gown and Camilla's designer couture. "Aurelia, there you are, hiding as usual." My mother materialized beside me. Her smile was a perfect polished mask. "You must come and say hello to the mayor. Julian has been telling him the most fascinating story about his latest merger." I allowed her to pull me into the throng. The conversation was a performance. Julian was at its center, holding court, his voice a confident baritone as he described a complex financial deal. My father stood beside him, beaming with a pride so intense it was almost a physical force. "And this is my daughter, Aurelia," my father said, gesturing to me as the mayor turned in my direction. "She's our quiet one, works with computers." The dismissal, though gentle, was as sharp as a paper cut. The mayor, a polite man named Harrison, smiled at me kindly. "Computers, eh? The way of the future. What kind of work do you do?" "I'm a freelance data consultant." I recited my cover story, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "Fascinating," the mayor said, before his attention was immediately recaptured by Julian. I drifted back to the edge of the room. A few minutes later, Camilla, my sister-in-law, floated over. She was holding a new, obscenely large diamond bracelet up to the light. "Isn't it exquisite?" she breathed, her eyes sparkling. "Julian gave it to me as an early anniversary present. He's been working so hard, the poor darling. That merger was a real beast." "It's beautiful, Camilla," I said, and I meant it. The bracelet was a work of art. But I knew it wasn't just a gift. It was a prop. Another piece of evidence in the ongoing case for Julian Vance's spectacular success. "What about you, Aurelia?" she asked, her tone shifting to one of practiced pity. Seeing anyone special, or still just focusing on your projects? Still focusing on my projects, I said with a tight smile. My project, at that moment, was a highly classified operation tracking a rogue state's attempt to infiltrate the Federal Reserve's digital systems. It was a project that had consumed my last 3 months, involving sleepless nights, complex code breaking, and a level of stress that would make Julian's merger look like a friendly game of Monopoly. But to her, it was just a project, a little hobby to keep this spinster sister busy. The family was seated at the head table, a long, imposing dais that put us on display. The dinner conversation was a continuation of the same theme: Julian's triumphs, my father's legal victories, my mother's social successes. I ate my salmon, offered polite smiles, and felt the familiar sensation of fading into the wallpaper. My phone, tucked into my small clutch, vibrated with a single coded message from my office. Scylla is stirring. Await instructions. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Scylla was our internal code name for a new, terrifyingly sophisticated strain of ransomware, a digital monster capable of crippling an entire nation's infrastructure. It had been dormant for weeks, until now. The breaking point came, as it often did, over dessert. The waiters had just served the chocolate lava cakes when my father stood to give his customary speech. He thanked the donors, praised the orchestra, and then, as always, his speech turned personal. I am so proud to stand here tonight, not just as a supporter of the arts, but as a father to a son who exemplifies the very best of our city, a man of vision, of ambition. Julian, would you stand up? Julian stood to a round of applause, a modest, charming smile on his face. My mother looked at him as if he had single-handedly invented music. I felt a familiar, dull ache in my chest. My father spoke for another 5 minutes, listing Julian's recent achievements as if reading from a press release. He never once mentioned my name. After he sat down, the conversation at our table turned to the future. "We'll need to start planning the next generation, son," my father said, winking at Julian. "My grandson will need to be ready to take over the world." "First, he needs to get into the right preschool," Camilla said, with a laugh. "It's a jungle out there." They chattered on, their voices a comfortable murmur of privilege and shared assumptions. I must have been quieter than usual, because Julian suddenly turned his attention to me. "What's wrong, Aurelia?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just overwhelmed by all this talk of actual achievement?" The table fell quiet. The passive aggression had just become active. "I'm just tired, Julian," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Tired of what?" he pressed, clearly enjoying the spotlight. "Your little freelance gigs keeping you up at night? I mean, what do you even do all day? You're 34 years old, you live in a tiny apartment, you have no husband, no kids, you're just playing with numbers on a screen?" He gestured vaguely with his hand, as if my entire life was a trivial, amusing hobby. My father chuckled. "Now, Julian, be nice. Your sister is very responsible." "Responsible," Julian laughed, a loud, dismissive sound that turned heads at the neighboring tables. "She's a nobody. Let's be honest. She's a ghost. She shows up, she smiles, she says nothing of interest, and she disappears. She contributes nothing. What have you ever accomplished that actually matters, Aurelia?" The words hit me with the force of a physical slap. A nobody. It was the word that had lived in the subtext of our family for 3 decades, and he had finally said it out loud. I looked at my parents, expecting, hoping for one of them to intervene, to defend me. My mother stared down at her cake, a faint, uncomfortable smile on her face. My father simply took a sip of his wine, his silence a form of agreement. They were letting it happen. They believed it too. I felt something inside me break, a final, fragile thread of hope that one day they would see me. My eyes started to burn. I pushed my chair back, my hands trembling. "Excuse me?" I whispered, my voice choked. I was about to flee, to run to the restroom and hide until I could slip out unnoticed, just as I had done 100 times before. But as I stood, my phone vibrated again. A different, more urgent pattern this time. It was the emergency signal. Scylla is live, National Grid targeted, extraction imminent. At that exact moment, the grand doors to the ballroom burst open. The entire ballroom fell silent. All heads turned towards the entrance. Standing in the doorway were two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits. They wore earpieces, and their eyes scanned the room with a calm, unnerving intensity. They were so out of place in the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns that for a moment everyone seemed to think it was part of some planned entertainment. Then a third man stepped between them. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a similar suit, but he carried an air of absolute authority that commanded the room. He spotted me immediately, his gaze locking onto mine from across the ballroom. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. It was Elias Torn, my handler. He had never, in 10 years, appeared in my civilian life. His presence here meant one thing. This was the worst-case scenario. He began to walk towards our table, his movements economical and purposeful. The two agents fanned out, creating a subtle but unmistakable perimeter. The guests murmured, their confusion turning to alarm. My family stared, utterly bewildered. "Is this some kind of joke?" my father muttered, looking at Julian as if he might have arranged this as some bizarre prank. Julian just shook his head, his eyes wide with confusion. Torn reached our table. He ignored my stunned family completely, his focus entirely on me. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice low and calm, but carrying an unmistakable urgency, "I apologize for the intrusion. We have a code black situation. You are needed immediately." I found my voice, my training kicking in, pushing the family drama into a locked compartment in my brain. What's the status of Scylla? It's live. It has breached the primary firewalls of the Eastern power grid. They're projecting cascading failures within the hour if we can't contain it. The president has been briefed. The president? The words hung in the air, sucking the remaining oxygen from our corner of the room. My mother's hand flew to her chest. My father looked as if he had been struck by lightning. "Who are you people?" he stammered, trying to assert some control. Thorn didn't even glance at him. He was still looking at me, waiting for my response. "I'll need my comms kit and a secure terminal," I said, my voice crisp and professional. The trembling was gone, replaced by a cold, focused calm. I was no longer Aurelia Vance, the nobody. I was Aegis 7, my operational call sign. "We have a mobile command unit waiting downstairs, Ms. Vance. Everything you need is on board. We have a helicopter on the roof of the adjacent building for immediate transport to the primary command center." A helicopter. My family's expressions were a priceless tableau of shock. Camilla's perfectly lipstick mouth was hanging open. Julian looked as if he was going to be physically ill. "I need my bag," I said, gesturing to the small clutch on the table. One of the agents retrieved it and handed it to me. "We need to go, now," Thorn said. I nodded. I turned to my family who had just watched me be called a nobody. I looked at my brother, the golden son, whose face was a mixture of fear and dawning, horrified comprehension. I looked at my parents, who were staring at me as if I had suddenly sprouted wings. "I have to go to work," I said, simply. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away with the agents, leaving my family sitting in the wreckage of their own shattered perceptions, the sound of my name being whispered in my wake throughout the stunned ballroom. Walking out of that ballroom was like stepping from one reality into another. The moment the doors closed behind us, the hushed, glittering world of the gala was replaced by the clipped, urgent world of my real life. "What's the breach vector?" I asked Thorn as we strode through the hotel lobby, causing a stir among the staff and guests. "We're not sure yet," he replied, speaking into the microphone on his wrist. It's bypassed all known detection protocols. It's polymorphic. It changes its signature every time it replicates. Standard countermeasures are useless. So it's a ghost, I murmured. We had theorized about this kind of malware, but had never seen it in the wild. Exactly. We need you to give it a face. The mobile command unit was a black, windowless van parked in the hotel's loading bay. Inside, it was a technological marvel, all glowing screens and humming servers. An analyst was already at a console, his face pale in the blue light. "Ma'am," he said, immediately vacating the primary seat for me. "They're projecting a 30% grid failure in the next 48 minutes. New York, Boston, and D.C. would go dark first." I slid into the chair, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The world outside, the family dinner, the humiliation, it all melted away. There was only the code. Scylla was beautiful in its lethality, a complex, elegant web of destructive logic. It was like fighting a phantom, always one step ahead. The van sped through the city streets, a silent escort of black SUVs clearing the way. We arrived at the rooftop helipad, the blades of a sleek black helicopter already whipping the cold night air into a frenzy. As we lifted off, the city spread out beneath us like a carpet of diamonds, a fragile, glittering network of light that I was tasked with protecting. From the air, I could see the hotel, a bright jewel in the city's crown. I imagined my family still inside, their world upended. What must they be thinking? The thought was a fleeting distraction. I had a job to do. The primary command center, located in an undisclosed underground facility, was a cavern of controlled chaos. Dozens of analysts sat at workstations in a tiered amphitheater, all facing a massive central screen that showed a map of the United States with a creeping red virus representing Scylla's advance across the eastern seaboard. Aegis 7 is on deck. Someone called out, and a path was cleared for me to the central command console. For the next 3 hours, I was in a state of pure, unadulterated focus. The world narrowed to the lines of code on my screen. I was a digital detective, hunting for a single flaw, a single vulnerability in an otherwise perfect crime. Thorne stood behind me, a silent, steady presence, feeding me coffee and relaying updates from the Secretary of Defense. The breakthrough came at 2:17 a.m. I found it. A tiny, recursive loop in the malware's encryption key generator. A flaw. It was like finding a single loose thread on a perfectly woven tapestry. If I could pull on it, the whole thing might unravel. "I'm in," I said, my voice hoarse. A wave of relief washed through the room. "I can create a counter-agent, a kill switch, but I need to upload it directly to the core server that's being targeted. It's the only way to inoculate the system before the next wave of replication." "That server is in the Con Edison Grand Central substation," the chief of operations said, his face grim. "We can't get you in there remotely. The station is on full lockdown." "Then you'll have to get me in there physically," I said. There was a moment of stunned silence. "Ma'am, that's a civilian facility under active digital siege. It's too dangerous." "The alternative," I replied, not taking my eyes off the screen, "is that this entire seaboard goes back to the Dark Ages in the next 20 minutes. Get me a team. And get me a laptop with a hardline connection. I'm going in." The ride to the Grand Central substation was surreal. I was in the back of an armored vehicle, flanked by 2 heavily armed tactical agents, a ruggedized laptop on my knees. I was still in my navy blue evening dress and heels, a ridiculous sight in this world of Kevlar and steel. We screeched to a halt in front of a massive windowless brick building, its entrance already secured by a squad of federal agents. Inside, the substation was a labyrinth of humming transformers and thick, snaking cables. The air crackled with electricity. The plant manager, a harried-looking man in a hard hat, led us deep into the facility's core, to the primary server room. "We've isolated it as best we can," he shouted over the noise, "but it's still communicating with the network. It's fighting us." I sat at the terminal, my elegant dress feeling absurdly out of place. I plugged in my laptop and began the delicate digital surgery required to upload my kill switch. Skula fought back.
It tried to lock me out, to erase the very files I was trying to patch. It was a high-stakes game of digital chess, and the fate of millions of people depended on the outcome. My fingers danced across the keyboard. Time seemed to slow down. I could feel the presence of the agents at my back, of Thorne's voice in my earpiece. But they were all part of a distant reality. My reality was the glowing green cursor, the cascading lines of code, the digital ghost in the machine. Upload complete. I breathed, my fingers finally still. I initiated the counter-agent. On the massive monitor in the command center, which was being streamed to my laptop, we watched as the creeping red virus of Skula began to recede. A blue wave, my kill switch, spread across the network, neutralizing the threat, healing the system. A cheer erupted from the command center, the sound tinny through my earpiece. The substation manager was crying with relief. I just leaned back in my chair, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I had done it. I had faced the monster and won. By the time I was escorted out of the substation, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the New York skyline in shades of pink and orange. The city was still asleep, unaware of the catastrophe that had almost befallen it. Thorne met me at the entrance. "You did it, Ms. Vance," he said, his stoic expression softening into one of genuine admiration.
There are some very grateful people in Washington this morning. A car will take you home. You've earned some rest. The ride back to my quiet suburban apartment was a strange decompression. I walked into my home, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few hours. I took off the navy dress, now smudged with dust from the substation, and let it fall to the floor. I stood under a hot shower for a long time, washing away the night, the code, the pressure. As the water sluiced over me, the other reality, the family reality, came flooding back. The ballroom, Julian's cruel words, "You're a nobody." My parents' silent agreement, the humiliation. It felt like it had happened a lifetime ago, in another world, to another person. I stepped out of the shower and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, my eyes shadowed, but I also looked different. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that gala. I had faced a national crisis. I had looked into the digital abyss and hadn't blinked. A nobody? No. I knew exactly who I was. The real question was, what was I going to do about the family who had no idea? For 2 days, my world was silent. I slept for most of the first day, a deep, dreamless sleep of pure exhaustion. When I woke, the world felt muted, surreal. I made tea, sat in my quiet living room, and watched the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun. My phone remained dark, no calls, no texts, not from my family, not from my office. The silence was both a relief and a source of strange anxiety. It was the calm after the storm, and I didn't know what it meant. On the third day, the official world intruded. A package arrived by special courier. Inside was a simple, elegant box. Within the box, on a bed of dark velvet, lay the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. There was also a short handwritten note from the president himself. "Miss Vance, a grateful nation thanks you. Your courage and brilliance in the face of the Scylla crisis saved this country from a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Your secret is safe with us." I stared at the medal, the heavy bronze cool against my palm. It was the ultimate validation, an acknowledgement of my work from the highest possible authority. It was everything my family had never given me: recognition, respect, gratitude. I placed it carefully back in its box and slid it into the bottom of my sock drawer. It wasn't for them. It was for me. Later that afternoon, Elias Thorne called. "I trust you received the package," he said, his voice as professional as ever. It's overwhelming," I admitted. "It is well-deserved. I am also calling to inform you that your family has been making inquiries." A knot tightened in my stomach. "What kind of inquiries?"
Your father has been calling every contact he has in Washington, trying to find out who I am, who the agents were, what Code Black means. He's using his legal connections, name-dropping senators. He's being persistent. Of course he was. My father couldn't stand a mystery, especially one that diminished his own importance. And your brother? He has been quiet, too quiet. From our surveillance, it seems he's been making some unusual financial transfers, moving large sums of money to offshore accounts. It's raised some red flags. What do you think it means? We're not sure yet, but it's a thread we intend to pull. Just be aware, Aurelia. Your family is rattled. They are trying to reassert control over a narrative they no longer understand. Be prepared. His warning was unnecessary. I knew my family. Their shock would have worn off by now, replaced by a desperate need to reclaim their position at the top of the hierarchy. The silence from them wasn't shame. It was strategy. They were regrouping. The first move came that evening. It was a call from my mother. Her voice was a fragile, trembling thing, a carefully constructed performance of a terrified parent.
Aurelia, oh thank God. We've been so worried. Are you all right? We saw men take you away. We didn't know what to think. We called the police. You didn't need to do that, Mom. I told you I was going to work. Work? What kind of work involves men with guns and helicopters? We deserve an explanation, Aurelia. We are your parents. There it was. Not an apology for the humiliation, not a word about what Julian had said, just a demand, an assertion of their right to know my secrets. I can't discuss my work with you, Mom. You know that. This is different. This isn't about your little freelance projects anymore. Your father is worried you're in some kind of trouble with the government. Are you a spy? Her voice was a ridiculous mixture of fear and a strange, morbid excitement. I am not a spy, and I am not in trouble. I am fine. Well, it's not fine for us. You have embarrassed this family. The mayor was there. All of our friends. They're all asking questions. What are we supposed to say? You could try saying you're proud of me, I suggested, the words tasting like a foreign language. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Proud of what? She finally asked, genuinely bewildered. Proud of you for causing a scene and scaring everyone half to death? I saw then, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that they would never get it. They were incapable of seeing past their own reflection. My life was only real to them and how it affected their social standing. I have to go, Mom, I said, my voice flat. But Aurelia? I hung up the phone. I had drawn my first real boundary. It felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The first shot in a new war had been fired, and I had returned it. The days that followed were a masterclass in my family's unique brand of psychological warfare. Having failed to get information from me directly, they shifted their tactics to a campaign of public concern and private investigation. My mother began calling my few trusted friends, her voice dripping with worry. I'm just so concerned about Aurelia, she would say. She's become so secretive, so withdrawn, and the people she's involved with, it seems dangerous. We're just a family who loves her and wants to make sure she's safe. It was a brilliant strategy. She was painting me as a victim, a lost soul who had fallen in with a bad crowd, and them as the loving parents trying desperately to save me. They were attempting to isolate me from my support system. Fortunately, my friends knew me better. They would politely listen, then immediately call me to report the conversation. My father, meanwhile, was pulling every string he had. He flew to Washington, D.C., a trip I knew about thanks to Thorne's quiet surveillance. He was trying to use his political connections to get my security file unsealed. It was a fool's errand, an arrogant man banging on a door that would never open, but it showed the depths of his obsession. He couldn't stand being on the outside of power. But it was Julian's silence that was the most unnerving. While my parents were making noise, he was making moves. Thorne called me with an update a week after the gala. We've finished our preliminary analysis of the Skilla ransomware. It's interesting. Interesting how? It was an incredibly sophisticated piece of malware, but it had a very specific, almost surgical target, the digital infrastructure of a handful of major financial institutions. The power grid was secondary, a smokescreen to cause chaos and divert attention. The real target, or the banks. A cold premonition crept over me. Which banks? Thorne listed 3 of them. The third was the bank where my brother, Julian, was a senior partner. The bank's recent merger he had been bragging about at the dinner. Is that a coincidence? I asked, though I already knew the answer.
We don't believe in coincidences, Miss Vance. We dug into your brother's recent activities. The merger he was so proud of? It was a disaster. The company they acquired was a toxic asset, a financial time bomb. Your brother was the one who pushed the deal through. He was about to be exposed for gross negligence, possibly even fraud. He stood to lose everything: his job, his reputation, his fortune. So, what? We believe the Skilla attack was a desperate, insane gambit, an inside job. He colluded with a group of cybercriminals to create a crisis. The goal was to have the attack damage the bank's records so severely that the details of his fraudulent merger would be lost forever in the chaos. He would emerge a victim, a hero who survived the storm, rather than the architect of his own downfall. I felt sick. My own brother? He would have plunged the entire East Coast into darkness, risked the lives of millions, all to cover up his own professional failure? But he didn't know about you, Thorne continued. He didn't know that the one person on the planet capable of stopping his perfect crime was his own sister, the nobody he had dismissed his entire life. He never imagined we could neutralize the threat so quickly. He planned for chaos and destruction. He got a clean, quiet solution instead. And now the forensic trail is perfectly preserved. The irony was staggering. The ultimate act of his arrogance was to underestimate me. What happens now? I asked, my mind reeling. We are building a case, a very strong one. When we are ready, we will move on him. For now, he doesn't know that we know. He thinks he's safe. He just thinks his plan failed for unknown reasons. The knowledge was a heavy burden. I now knew my brother was a criminal of the highest order. The Golden Sun was a monster. And I was the one who had inadvertently exposed him. The family I had been trying to distance myself from was about to become the center of a national scandal, and I was standing right at the epicenter. The call from my mother came a week later. It was different from her previous attempts. The manufactured worry was gone, replaced by a raw, genuine terror. "Julian, he's been arrested," she sobbed into the phone. "Federal agents. They came to his office this morning. They took him away in handcuffs, Aurelia, in front of everyone." I remained silent. The heavy secret I'd been carrying, now public knowledge. They're saying he was involved in that blackout thing? That computer virus? It's insane. It's a mistake. My son is not a criminal. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Mom," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "Sorry. We need your help. Your father says the people who took you from the gala, they're the same people who arrested Julian. You know them. You have to talk to them. You have to tell them they've made a terrible mistake." She still didn't get it. She thought this was a misunderstanding, a bureaucratic error that could be cleared up if the right people talked to each other. "Mom, I can't do that." "Why not? You work with them. You can fix this. You owe him this, Aurelia. He is your brother." The familiar refrain, "You owe him," the weight of a lifetime of unearned obligations. "No, Mom, I don't," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I can't interfere in a federal investigation. And you need to listen to me very carefully. You and Dad need to hire the best criminal defense attorney you can find, and you need to stop talking to the press." But Julian is innocent. Then his lawyer will prove that in court. I hung up before she could argue further. The grief I felt was complex. I was grieving for the brother I thought I had, for the family that was now irrevocably broken. But I was also grieving for the profound, tragic waste of it all. Julian had been given every advantage in life, every opportunity to succeed honestly, and he had thrown it all away out of pride and greed.
The news was everywhere. Prominent banker arrested in connection with Scylla's cyber attack. The story of the brilliant, wealthy Julian Vance, accused of masterminding a plot that nearly crippled the nation, was a media sensation. My family was thrust into a harsh, unflattering spotlight. Reporters camped outside their house. Their friends stopped calling. The foundation gala, the source of my mother's social standing, was now remembered as the scene of my dramatic extraction, and the night before her son's world fell apart. I stayed hidden, my involvement in the case a closely guarded secret. Thorne had assured me my name would be kept out of it, but I watched the downfall of my family from a distance, a silent, unwilling observer. My father's arrogance crumbled under the weight of the federal charges. He aged a decade in a matter of weeks. My mother retreated from her social life, a recluse in her own home. The Vance family, once a symbol of success, was now a symbol of disgrace. Then came the call I had been dreading and expecting. It was from Camilla, Julian's wife. "I need to see you," she said, her voice devoid of its usual breezy confidence. Alone. We met in a quiet, anonymous coffee shop halfway between our homes. She looked smaller, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. The diamond bracelet was gone. "I'm leaving him," she said without preamble. "I'm taking the children and moving back to my parents' home in California." I just nodded, unsure of what to say. "Did you know?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "Did you know what he was planning?" "No, not until after. He confessed everything to me last night," she said, her voice breaking. "He was so arrogant. He thought he was untouchable. He never thought he would get caught. He told me he was glad you were a nobody. He said your quiet, unimportant life was the perfect cover. No one would ever suspect his failure of a sister was the one person who could burn his whole world down. Failure of a sister." The words were a gut punch, even now. "He's a fool," Camilla whispered, tears finally streaming down her face. "He had everything. A beautiful family, a successful career, and he gambled it all away because he couldn't admit he made a mistake. He's not the man I thought I married." She reached into her purse and pulled out a key. "This is to their storage unit. Julian kept files there. Things he didn't want at the house. Old journals, financial records from before we were married. I think you should have them. Maybe they'll help you understand. I just want to be free of it all." She slid the key across the table, then stood up and walked out without another word. A ghost, leaving behind the wreckage of a life she no longer wanted. The storage unit was in a bleak industrial part of town. The air smelled of dust and forgotten things. The key Camilla had given me slid smoothly into the lock of Unit 237. As I rolled up the metal door, I was met with the sight of my brother's entire life packed away in neat banker's boxes. It wasn't just old files. It was his childhood. Boxes of old trophies, school projects, photo albums. My parents had saved every scrap of his existence, a meticulously curated museum of their golden son. I started with the boxes marked financials. It was all there, a decade-long history of recklessness hidden behind a facade of success. Bad investments, gambling debts covered up by his parents, loans from shady sources. The prestigious merger wasn't his first major failure. It was just the first one so big he couldn't hide it. He had been living on a knife's edge for years, always one bad deal away from ruin. Then I found the journals. They started in his late teens. The early entries were filled with a familiar, arrogant confidence. But as I read on, a darker theme emerged. A deep, gnawing insecurity and a bitter, resentful obsession with me.
He wrote about the scholarship I'd won for college. Now they'll never stop comparing us. She gets things for free because she's gifted. I have to fight for every inch. He wrote about the praise I received from our math teachers. She doesn't even try. It's just easy for her. No one sees how hard I have to work to keep up.
It was delusional. I had worked tirelessly for my grades. He had been the one who seemed to coast through life on a wave of charm and privilege. But in his mind, I was the one with the unfair advantage. I was the one who was a constant, quiet threat to his status as the brilliant one. His entire life, it seemed, had been a performance designed to prove his superiority, not just to the world, but to himself. He needed me to be a nobody so he could feel like a somebody. The most damning discovery came in a journal from the year after I took the job with Aegis. He had written about a conversation with our father. Dad is worried about Aurelia. He thinks she's in some kind of trouble. He hired a private investigator to follow her. A ridiculous waste of money. She's probably just a glorified secretary in some boring tech firm. But Dad is obsessed. He can't stand not knowing. My father had investigated me. The betrayal was so profound it left me breathless. He hadn't trusted me. He had seen my secrecy not as a professional necessity, but as a personal slight, a challenge to his authority. I packed up one box of the most relevant files and journals and left the rest. I had seen enough. The drive home was a blur. I finally understood. The family dynamic wasn't just about favoritism. It was about fear. They were all terrified of Julian failing because his failure would reflect on them. And they were terrified of me succeeding because my quiet, independent success challenged the very foundation of their worldview. When I got home, I called my parents. "I need to see you both," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." They were sitting in their cavernous, silent living room when I arrived. They looked smaller, diminished by the scandal. "We can't help you with Julian," my father said immediately, his voice weary. "His lawyers have advised us not to interfere." "I'm not here about Julian's legal problems," I said, placing the box from the storage unit on the coffee table between us. "I'm here about ours." I took out Julian's journals. I took out the financial records. And then I took out the private investigator's report on me, which I had found tucked away in a file in my father's home office, a long-shot guess that had paid off. "You had me followed," I said, my voice quiet but shaking with a cold rage. My father had the grace to look ashamed. My mother just stared, her face pale. "I wanted to make sure you were safe," he mumbled. "No, you wanted to make sure I wasn't more important than you. You couldn't stand the thought of me having a life you didn't control, just like you couldn't stand the thought of Julian not being the perfect son." I opened one of the journals. "He has been terrified of me his entire life. Did you know that? He saw every success of mine as a personal failure of his. And instead of helping him, instead of building his confidence, you fed his insecurity. You propped him up by pushing me down." "That's not true," my mother whispered. "Isn't it?" I asked. "You created a monster, not a criminal mastermind, just a deeply insecure man who was so terrified of being seen as ordinary that he was willing to risk everything to maintain the illusion of being extraordinary. You did this to him, and you did this to me." The truth, raw and undeniable, finally sat between us. There were no more secrets, no more lies, no more performances, just the ugly, painful reality of a family broken by its own deceptions. The silence in that living room was a living thing, heavy with the weight of 30 years of unspoken truths. My parents didn't deny it. They couldn't. The evidence was laid out before them, a brutal autopsy of their family. My mother was the first to break, her carefully constructed composure crumbling into deep, ragged sobs. "We just wanted him to be happy," she wept. We thought if we just gave him enough, he would feel secure." "You gave him everything except the one thing he needed," I said softly. "The permission to be himself, to be imperfect. You needed him to be a star so you could feel like successful parents. And you needed me to be a nobody so his light wouldn't be diminished." My father looked up.
His eyes, for the first time I could remember, filled not with anger or authority, but with a profound, hollow grief. "What have we done?" he whispered to no one in particular. It wasn't a question I could answer. It was a question they would have to spend the rest of their lives answering for themselves. I stood up, the anger draining out of me, leaving behind a vast, quiet emptiness. "I can't fix this," I said. "None of us can. All we can do is decide what happens now." I didn't wait for their response. I walked out of that house, leaving the box of secrets on their coffee table. I didn't look back. I knew, with a final, painful certainty, that the family I had grown up in was gone forever. It had never really existed at all. Julian's trial was a quiet affair, moved to a federal court in a different state to avoid the media circus. He pled guilty to a lesser charge in a deal his expensive lawyers worked out. He was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security federal prison and ordered to pay millions in restitution. The golden son, the man who was supposed to take over the world, was now a federal inmate. My parents sold the large colonial house, the stage for all their performances, and moved into a modest condominium. The scandal had shattered their social standing. Many of their friends, the ones who had flocked to their galas and admired their perfect son, abandoned them. My father took early retirement. My mother stopped hosting parties. They were forced to live a quiet, simple life, the very kind of life they had always disdained in me. I sent them a single letter after the sentencing. I didn't offer forgiveness, not yet. It was too soon for that. But I did offer a path forward. I told them I was willing to start again on new terms. No more secrets, no more roles, no more expectations, just honesty. I told them I would be open to family therapy if they were willing to do the real painful work of examining the patterns that had broken us. They wrote back a short, humble note. They agreed. The first therapy session was excruciating. The second was slightly less so. We are still in the early days of a long, difficult journey. I don't know if we will ever be a close family. I don't know if the trust that was so thoroughly shattered can ever be fully repaired. But for the first time, we are talking. For the first time, they are listening. 1 year later, I stood on the observation deck of the new skyscraper downtown, the wind whipping my hair across my face. It was the tallest building in the city, a gleaming testament to modern engineering, and I had been the lead structural analyst on the project. My secret life and my public life were beginning to merge. After the Scylla crisis and Julian's arrest, my position with Aegis had become untenable. My anonymity was compromised. Thorne had arranged for an honorable discharge and a transition into the private sector with a glowing and carefully redacted letter of recommendation. I now worked for a high-profile engineering firm, doing work that was challenging, important, and wonderfully, blessedly public. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Thinking of you. Hope you have a wonderful day." This simple, unconditional message was still a novelty, something I was learning to accept without suspicion. Our therapy sessions had been brutal, but they had been transformative. We had unearthed decades of dysfunction, and in the process had begun to build something new, something more honest. I'd visited Julian in prison once. The meeting had been awkward and painful. The arrogant, confident brother I had known was gone, replaced by a quieter, more reflective man. He had apologized, a real, unqualified apology for a lifetime of casual cruelty born of his own insecurity.
"I spent my whole life trying to be the person I thought Dad wanted me to be," he had told me, his eyes filled with a sadness that was deeper than just his current circumstances. "I never stopped to figure out who I actually was. I was so jealous of you, Aurelia. You were always so solid. You knew who you were." The irony was breathtaking. The nobody had been the only one who was ever really a somebody.
I didn't know if we would ever be close, but the resentment I had carried for so long had softened into a kind of sad compassion. I had a new life now, one of my own making. I had started dating a man named Ben, an architect I had met on the skyscraper project. He was kind and funny, and he was completely unimpressed by my past with Aegis or my family's drama. He was impressed by my mind, by my passion for my work, by the person I was right now. My apartment was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a home, a place filled with laughter and the easy comfort of a shared life. My circle of friends had widened. The secrecy I had lived with for so long was gone, and in its place was a new, welcome openness. That evening, I was attending another gala, not a family foundation event, but an award ceremony for women in engineering. I was receiving an award for my work on the skyscraper. As I got ready, I thought about the navy dress I had worn to that fateful family dinner. I had thrown it away the day after. Tonight, I was wearing a vibrant emerald green gown, a color of my own choosing. My parents were in the audience. They had asked if they could come, a hesitant, hopeful request. I had agreed. They said not at the head table, but in the general audience, quiet supporters. They were not there to take credit for my success, but simply to witness it. It was a start. As my name was called, I walked to the stage. I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of my colleagues, my friends, Ben, my parents. I thought about the journey that had brought me to this stage. The quiet girl in the corner, the forgotten daughter, the nobody. I had been all of those things. But I was more. In my hand, I held my acceptance speech, a few polite, prepared remarks. But as I stood at the podium, looking at the faces before me, the carefully crafted words felt inadequate. I put the note cards down. For a long time, I began, my voice clear and steady. I believed that my worth was determined by the roles others assigned to me: the quiet daughter, the responsible sister, the unassuming colleague. I lived in the shadows, believing the spotlight was meant for other people. I thought that to be successful, you had to be loud. To be important, you had to be seen. I was wrong. I paused, my gaze sweeping across the room until it found my parents. They were both watching me, their expressions open and unguarded. I learned, through a series of rather dramatic events, that true strength isn't about the noise you make. It's about the foundation you build. It's about the quiet, consistent, and often invisible work of becoming the most solid, reliable, and honest version of yourself. It's about knowing who you are, especially when no one else is looking. I thought of the medal in my sock drawer, the secret I would carry forever. I thought of the lines of code that had saved a nation, the work no one would ever know I had done. My work is about building structures that can withstand immense pressure. I continued, but the most important structure any of us will ever build is our own character. Tonight, I am not just accepting an award for a building of steel and glass. I am accepting it for the quiet, invisible work of building a life. And I'm sharing this honor with everyone in this room who has ever felt like a nobody, to remind you that the quiet work, the unseen work, the honest work is what truly matters. It is what will hold you up when everything else comes crashing down. The applause was warm and genuine. As I walked off the stage, my father was the first person to greet me. He didn't say anything. He just hugged me, a real, heartfelt hug. And in that embrace, I felt the first fragile foundation of a new kind of family being laid. It wasn't perfect, and it was still under construction, but for the first time, it felt like it was being built to last. Have you ever felt like the nobody in your family or workplace? How did you learn to define your own worth outside of others' expectations? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more stories of personal triumph. Remember that your value is not determined by the volume of your applause, but by the strength of your foundation. Thank you for listening.